But they hear what people they talk. What you get, I shall kill it till love. It's a love when I wanna get another one. I go take and do it in I love. Waiting you love, oh. No be waiting I love, oh. Waiting I love, I go do what we done my heart, oh. Go no be vodka. Mr. Money Changer. But when I know I know the ways that Mr.
You let a yum 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 yum. Na yela pere matina yela pese. You let a yum 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 yum. Na yela pere muna kapera. Chora kakisa oyari yela pere balungna baire.
Well, good afternoon. It's yet another Saturday afternoon here in the Boston area. I guess about 7 p.m. in Ghana, and then we bring you the assembly. On Tuesday, Ghana's new president was inaugurated. It was as if the whole of Africa was there. There was an overwhelming attendance by a number of African leaders. About 21 African heads of states graced the occasion. Renowned business stalwarts in Africa were also in attendance, especially those from Nigeria. It's as if, the inauguration received an overwhelming endorsement by Africa. So we are here to talk about the vision that was enunciated by the president in his inaugural speech, which he titled A Reset. He argued that Ghana needed a reset from the economic hardship and corruption that it had undergone during the previous administration. So I'm here with some colleagues to talk about this vision, its plausibility, and some of the hurdles that the new president, could potentially face or would possibly have to overcome to see this vision through. So with me here today, Sylvia Bauer, who is an associate professor of sociology at York University. In fact, when we went to Brock University for our masters, Sylvia had set the bar so high that we were graded on the curve to our detriment. So Sylvia, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to have to be here again, and Happy New Year to everyone.
And then I have Ivy Fofier, who is an assistant professor of media studies at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. My dear friend Oreku Kusi Ampofo, who is a policy analyst based in Canada. And then Isaac Kojo Edum, who is an assistant professor of political science at Carleton University in Canada as well. So, gentlemen and ladies, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Okay. So, I will take your initial comments on the inauguration, the president's speech and the vision that he espoused in the speech. But while you make your initial comments, I want us to also address something that I found almost, if you like, contradictory on that occasion, right? The head of state of Burkina Faso had a roaring applause when he arrived, and then when he was called upon to go and greet the president. I mean, this is an occasion where we're literally celebrating democracy, and yet somebody who came into power by the barrel of the gun, received such approval from sort of the masses in attendance, right? So while you give me your initial comments about, the whole inauguration ceremony, also comment on this contrast that we see in terms of a democracy and then other forms of government, such as we have in Cote d'Ivoire. So I'll begin with you, Sylvia.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for actually opening with that, because that was one of the first things I wanted to remark on. Not so much the controversy around him wearing a pistol to greet the president, which seemed to have evoked some concerns. I didn't see that as a big deal. I actually thought that it marked the occasion quite well, that, he was a military leader, and to that extent, that gun symbolized the fact that this is how he came to power. And I wouldn't be surprised that it was just a ceremonial thing, part of his garb. Nevertheless, I think that applause that he received, or that endorsement, as it were, that we heard from the crowd, really indicates for all of us that, and Mahama pointed to that, President Mahama pointed to some of that in his speech when he talked about the fact that although people are happy with the democracy that we have in the country and the fact that we've been able to do these transitions over a period of time, that they are also increasingly weary about the fact that these kinds of things are not fulfilling the dreams of democracy, and that leaders ought to take that into consideration in governance. And I think that was expressed in the overwhelming applause that Touare got in attending this event. I don't think that was an endorsement necessarily of military rule, particularly in a country that, also has a history of it where people know this. But I think it's got to the point where people are calling for not a military coup, but a certain revolution or transformation in terms of how we govern, or in terms of how people receive the dividends of democracy. And I think that was the message that was sent, more so than the fact that we want. So if we are going to read this, I would say that yes, there's some amount of a desire for a coup, not a military coup. We always have to be very careful in terms of how we use all the adjectives that qualify these things, because I think that people, and Mahama said this, and I'll go a little bit into some of that speech when he talked about the fact that one of the things that he's been hearing a lot, and he's not the only one who is hearing it, is the expression of hope. The people are talking about hope is taking over the reins of government. And so, of course, the bar is all the way up there in terms of what people are expecting that his government will be able to fix very quickly in 4 years. So there's a very tall order for them. And I think that all of the other leaders from the continent that were there were more so reminded of it when Touare made his appearance from Burkina Faso. I'll come back to some of the speech unless you want me to go into it right away, because I have a number of points that I wanted to talk about in relation to the vision and the reset vision that Mahama set on his very first.
All right, we'll come to that, but I just want opening comments on, the overall event and the contrast that we saw right there. So, Oreko, I'll come to you with this question too. Is it also to do with his charisma? Sylvia says it's not so much of an endorsement, but could it be charisma too?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. It's just, I have his personality invoked that type of applause from Ghanaians. And because you've asked me a direct question, it didn't allow me to give comment, to give my commentary about the overall ceremony, which was fantastic. So let me start from there.
Okay.
Mahama's, from his attire to everything, was spot on. The attendance level was great. The whole country stood behind him and a lot of folks were happy. I think he has an overwhelming endorsement from Ghanaians to do the work that he has set to do. So everything for me went well. And I think it was also a big statement to the rest of Africa and the world that democracy in Ghana has come to stay despite all the functional difficulties that we have with it. Is also a big statement that while other countries struggle with peaceful transition of government, we have found a way to do it with finesse, to do it with a lot of appeal that a lot of countries would like to emulate. So it's something that it's a challenge to a lot of countries, but we have found a way to do that. And for me, it's a big statement that we made in terms of everything. Tuari's appearance, and I'm not a fan of him because of just share the way he does his things. For me, it was also a breakdown of state protocol. I unlike Sylvia, I was worried about the gun. I don't think we should allow anybody to openly display gun in front of our president, and it shouldn't be allowed. For me, at a point, his bodyguards wanted to go upstage with him to the extent that our security guards had to stop him. That hey, you guys cannot go that far. So I don't know what kind of arrangement, what kind of conversation that they had. State protocol should do better. His applause he got is normal of Ghanaians. The way he landed, the way he was showing brute force, the way his charisma, it doesn't in any way, for me, give an endorsement of his character or his governance or military dictatorship. We have gone past that. If he comes to Ghana right now, we will vote against him because we don't really like those things. But he showed up the way he appeared. His dressing alone, it's something that can exude as excitement. So for me, that was where the applause was coming from. But apart from that, he's a character we've seen before in our country. He's a character Burkina Faso has seen before, and I don't think they go anywhere with such a character. I think they should quickly transition to a path of democracy. Burkina Faso should quickly transition to a different path of governance that will allow deliberation, that will allow inclusivity, and that will do away with populism and charismatism.
Okay. All right. So yeah, Ivy, I will come with you with the same question. Do we merit our renown, right? Because I mean, the whole of Africa almost was there. You know, a lot of Africans in the diaspora came for the occasion. It was a glorious moment, but do we really merit that renown?
Well, to some extent, I'll say that we do. First of all, it was a very beautiful ceremony, very well thought out, and everything was literally intentional. Except I will agree with Oreku on the fact that the Burkina Faso guy and his gun really scared me when he went upstage to greet the president. I think that we shouldn't, in any circumstances, allow anything like that. But we had many heads of states there. In fact, California was burning and our mayor was there. So it was a beautiful ceremony. But I also agree with both Oreku and Sylvia that the applause that Traore received was just the aesthetics. I think that we have moved beyond being military leaders. I was really concerned when our Speaker of Parliament was giving him so much fans and explaining how Burkina Faso Alliance of Africa or whatever. I felt that we shouldn't, fuel that kind of charisma in any military leader anywhere in Africa. So it was good that he's a head of state. He showed up. He made an appearance. Ghanaians, the way he dressed up, it was beautiful to see him come. Ghanaians loved him, but it wasn't an endorsement of any kind of military rule. But it was also to invoke in Ghanaians what we are looking for in this government. So we feel like we need some kind of revolution in how governance is performed in Ghana. So it's like, oh, this is some kind of leader or some leadership skill that we want to see in our current governance. So we want to see some kind of evolution, some kind of work, immediate sort of democracy. So what he exudes is what we're looking for, the hope that he exudes, but not necessarily an endorsement of military rule. But in all, I think that everything was intentional. Lots of heads of states, very inspiring speech from the president. And we hope that that inspiring speech will be set the tone for what we are going to see in the next 4 years with Mahama's presidency. But I also think that generally, it's outside gentility home cry. We do have a very good look in the international front. Everybody sees that we have a good and thriving democracy, but we need to work to merit that good and thriving democracy that we see when we are outside of the country.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, Ike, I mean, you are the China expert. Let me come to you with a quote from the Chinese leader. Was it Deng who said he doesn't care about the color of the cat, but as long as it catches mouse? Right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, so this is why anyway, this is our first time after the elections. I think the last time we were here, we were talking about what was going to happen, the predictions and everything else. I was hoping that we will start with how the election outcome was before the transition, but be it as it may, it's fine. We can go into it right away. So I would put the reception that Traore got in Ghana in the context of the transition, right? So obviously, this transition, I mean, the ceremony, let's focus. The ceremony was, I think it was very well planned. In fact, kudos to the people that were behind it. I know that for the NDC, for sure, I know that Standube, for example, will be a key architect behind the planning of the event. It was beautifully done. And of course, here you involve the state protocol. So when it comes to the speeches, the other event and all of that, I think those are all beautifully done. Of course, we can go to the speech that President Mahama gave later on. But one of the things that I noticed was that there was a lot of national colors, right? Obviously, so that's beautiful. But the invitation to Traore is something that I want us to pay attention to, because you'll notice that even before President Mahama was sworn in, he had done a travel across the continent right after he won the elections, right? So he traveled to Kenya, to Benin and other places. I think he was there to sort of invite them to the ceremony, but also to build on, because he's been a president before, right? So it was easy for him to be able, I don't think that has ever happened before, that I don't know, I could be wrong, but the president-elect is able to travel to different countries and come back and hold. I think he may not have gone to Burkina Faso, but I think there is a message that is being sent there. You would notice that the Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have formed what is known as the Alliance of the Sahel, right? And part of what they are doing, of course, they have been kicked out of ECOWAS, right, after the military coup d'etats in their countries. They've been kicked out. In fact, the information that I have is that there is not a very positive sort of relationship between Traore and former President Akufo-Addo.
Okay.
And so for Mahama to have invited him, I think there is a message that is being sent out there, which is I don't think it's an endorsement of the coup in Burkina Faso or a military leader, but I think what Mahama is going to do is to try to bring him into or bring them back into the ECOWAS fold, right? And to maybe become involved in that transition from the kind of governance they have now to maybe a civilian government. I suspect that's part of what is happening. You would notice that our neighbor to the west, Ivory Coast, with the president of Cote d'Ivoire, was not at the ceremony.
Okay.
And that's partly, some people make the argument that it's because Traore was there, and of course, if he's coming, then maybe Ouattara is not going to come. So those are some of the things. But I think the sort of I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
So I think the cheering that he got is very typical Ghanaian thing, right? And and it's when you see military men in those uniforms, I think that was why people were cheering. But it's also because of what Sylvia said earlier. Don't forget when Traore staged the coup and came to power, and not just in Burkina but also in Mali, a lot of people, youth, were on the street jubilating. And my argument is that they were not necessarily jubilating the return of the generals in uniform into governance, but it was because of a celebration of some kind of expectations of what is supposed to come. Because, like I said last time, the democracy that we're practicing is not being felt in people's pocket, right? But here's the other thing, though. Here is the caution that I have based on, if you follow the Afrobarometer survey and in Ghana, a lot of Ghanaians actually in the last round of survey, a lot of Ghanaians, I can't remember the percentage, but some Ghanaians actually believe that they would prefer to be under military dictatorship if it will bring about economic salvation to them more than the democracy, even though majority of Ghanaians, of course, believe that democracy has come to stay. So that's one observation that I make of that. The last one I also want to mention is that if you watch when Traore came down from his plane or his chopper or whatever the case may be, he all the time that he was greeting every official, he was using the fist bump, right? I've never seen that before. That state official, like a leader, greets everybody else with a fist bump, everybody else, right? There was no handshake. I don't know if he did that with a speaker, but that was a very interesting observation that I noticed. And it's I mean, that's the kind of personality that he is. And I don't think he stole the show of the event.
Yeah.
But I know I'm not a security expert. I think before he came there had been some negotiations about his conduct, because normally when you have a head of state coming to your country, it is the host government that provides security. But in this case, that was not the case, right? He had his bodyguard right with him, except that of course they were not on stage, but they were all around him. And I think it is something that Mahama is going to pay attention to. Even after the ceremony, the following day, they had a meeting. So that tells me, like I was saying, that because of the fracas that he had with Kufuor, Mahama is probably gonna try and do something about the situation in Burkina.
Yeah. So I think Burkina Faso is an independent state. No country has the right to determine the sort of the form of government that is supposed to be practiced in another state. And so, as you know, a country will extend sort of courtesies to other sovereign states. So I guess some people were arguing that why should he be invited to such an event, which I feel that is not an argument to make. But the reason why I brought this up for a discussion is because of the fact that Traore is being celebrated across the internet as somebody who is delivering the goods for Burkina Faso, right? And so I wanted us to contrast it with a democracy to see if indeed the idea of democracy and the expectations of the populace are being met, right? What do we want from a democracy? Do we just want the freedom of speech, or we want it to be accompanied by certain material outcomes? And I think it was a good contrast in the sense that it would be a signal for our governments to sit up, and so that's my opinion about this. But let's move on to the speech and the vision that Mahama rolled out. Now, some people are billing this particular transition as the second independence. I don't know if it's undue pressure that is being put on this administration, or are we likely to see a transformation that would fit the characterization of a true independence? Right. And what is that going to look like? What exactly are we expecting from this administration? So I'll give you the opportunity to go into the vision that he's espoused and what your expectations are in terms of the reset that Mahama described. What is it going to look like? I don't know. So let me begin with you, Sylvia.
Yeah, well, thank you. And just before I get to that, Ike, something about the fist bumps. He did greet Professor Opoku-Agyeman by removing his beret.
Yes.
So that was a bit different in terms of his, the way he greeted the other male heads of state, Professor Nana, and then eventually, a handshake and a bit of a space hug with John Mahama. So that was an interesting sort of display on its own. Well, I mean, you said he didn't steal the show, but here he is stealing our own show in terms of the the attention that we are paying to him. But, there's a lot there, even in terms of the alliance of the Sahel, despite the fact that we are all here, and I think fundamentally across places, people are against or opposed to dictatorship, right? And military dictatorship, because it's often one of those areas that where people can govern without any form of accountability to anyone, right? And I think that's why people are a bit worried, or people can be worried about that. But we've also seen the outpouring of support of the youth of these countries where these coups took place more recently, for these coup d'etats, right? So again, for me, is the lessons that we are drawing from these things, not so much in terms of what is in name.
Exactly.
Because I mean, in the last, at least in the last 4 years, and a lot of the conversations that we are having in Ghana, it's also the fact that we felt as if we were under some sort of a dictatorship where, there wasn't transparency. And even if there was, people saw things that were going wrong, people felt very powerless to say anything. People felt that they could not speak out against what was happening and the rest of it. So there are those kinds of things that we need to weigh, the substantive issues. So it's one thing to say, well, this is the matter, but also, let's get into why are the youth all of a sudden really, really demanding for change in these kinds of immediate fashions. So to the inaugural speech and to the research, you're right, Aganatha, this is going to be, I think Ghanaians are expecting a miracle, and there are no surprises why this is happening. There are just simply no surprises why people are begging for some sort of a miracle. I am hoping that people understand that this will not be an overnight transformation, and that some of the pains that we are experiencing, especially where it comes to the economic difficulties and challenges that the country is facing, that this is going to take a while, especially if we are going to do things right? If we are going to actually institutionalize long-term changes, then some of the immediate effects that people are looking for are not going to be realized immediately. However, the president did mention that, he outlined 26 areas of actions in his 100 days, right? Which, and I think people are going to hold him to those kinds of things in terms of, in terms of delivery. And, Ike had said this is not his first, maybe it wasn't Ike, it was Eroku who talked about the fact that as someone who is coming into power again, the first president to seem to have taken a vacation, seeing how things have worked. And let's not forget that when we're transitioning from Mahama to Akufo-Addo, the first Akufo-Addo regime, that there was similar excitement about Akufo-Addo coming into government, because people had been thoroughly disappointed by Mahama's regime. Of course, Mahama seemed to then have been redeemed by the ills of this government. Not so much that we can count out some of his own ills in the first administration, but because what has happened has kind of, shocked everyone, so to speak. So Mahama has seen this before. So I would be disappointed. Well, disappointment is not the word that I'm looking for. I'm a sociologist. Would I really be surprised? But I will be surprised if he repeats these, sort of mistakes or errors, or if they govern without that. Now, we are talking about Mahama, but I would like to really bring in the fact that we also have Professor Opoku-Agyeman as a running mate to Mahama. I doubt very much that she is going to take a back seat if let's even say that Mahama at some point becomes incompetent. So that is one of the things that I'd like us to
Okay.
also bring into the conversation. The fact is that we are also in a very historic moment, going back to the inauguration, the very first time.
So we'll come to her in particular, but for instance, I just wanted to, just hit it right from the hip.
Yeah.
The MPP came into power with the free SHS as their signature policy. You mentioned the core areas of effort that the Mahama administration or Mahama has put out as within his 120 days ambition. So what area do you feel that needs to be addressed with a similar level of urgency or attention that the MPP gave to free SHS?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think I'm probably going to move on a little bit, not so much to what can be addressed. I mean, some of the things that can be addressed there for me are, low-hanging fruit, right? You do this, you do this. One of the things that people are clamoring for, of course, is the issue of accountability, which he mentioned repeatedly, and the clampdown on corruption, accountability, and the fight against corruption, which is one of the big things for many people. And he talked about that as one of the 4 areas that they are going to be tackling: economic stabilization, improving the business environment, governance and constitutional reforms, and then accountability. But if I'm going to talk about what I'm expecting, and I think that some of that conversation will go on a little for me, is that they really do pay attention to gender equity. And Mahama did mention that significantly in his speech, and I was impressed to see that he was talking about inclusivity, removing barriers. And when he did talk about, inclusivity and removing barriers, he also touched on diversity and the fact that, Ghanaians, irrespective of any background, would have the same or similar opportunities to contribute to the building of the nation. So for me, those things are very important: inclusivity, removing barriers in all sectors of the economy, all sectors of governance. Because sometimes, there is this thing of pigeonholing certain things and saying, well, this is the preserve of this. So they're talking a lot about agribusiness. Agribusiness must reflect that level of inclusivity and diversity. If we are talking about governance and constitutional reforms, we are expecting to see those kinds of things. In talking about appointments, we are expecting to see gender parity in terms of appointments in government and government positions, right? So I could go on and on, but I just wanted to highlight those things. One of the things that I will be remiss if I didn't talk about is the fact that Mahama also talked about our relations with our neighbors. And I was very happy to see that sort of, what I'm hoping is a true Pan-African vision. And, Ike had mentioned the fact that he traveled around some parts of the continent, that we bring back a Pan-African vision in our country, because that has been lacking. When he mentioned the fact that, the trade growth and the growth of economies in the BRICS, has now surpassed the other traditional economies that we've been used to, I think that's a signaling to African leaders that, regional trade needs to be strengthened, that our regional relations with one another is something that we have to pay attention or particular attention to if we are to move forward individually and as a continent. And, I cannot emphasize that fact enough.
All right. Okay. So, Ike, let me come to you on this matter. Again, the question: are Ghanaians expecting too much? Or what do you think should be the immediate areas of concentration of this administration? Yeah, so let's touch on the expectation as well as what you are expecting them to focus on in the early days of the administration.
Well, so those of us who have been observing Ghana politics, not just as Ghanaians, but also as students of Ghana politics, we are presented with a very interesting sort of future, right? We have a president, like Sylvia said, who has served as a president before. This is his second term. Normally, what you have is that you have a second term that continues right after your first term. He has had 8 years of a break, right? Vacation. And I think he has had enough time to be able to not only assess himself as a president or as a leader, but to be able to also assess really where Ghana is and what else he can contribute to it. So President Mahama has come to the presidency with a very unique experience that none of our president has had in the past. A key word that the NDC in their manifesto and as part of their campaigning that we use is the word reset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the reset here is a big one, and I was paying attention to that a lot, right? Because I think it's really one of the things that we need in Ghanaian politics and governance. A reset, in my view, is we are going back to like when you get a phone, right? You go to default factory settings, which means that you are going to start from somewhere that like a clean slate,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know that it's not exactly the same when it comes to governance. But here, look at the outcome of the elections. Before I come to specifically some of the policies that they put out there, I've heard those who are making the argument that was it the NDC and Mahama that won the election, or was it MPP that lost the election because they had a lower voter turnout from people that would normally vote for the MPP. Look, the NDC under the leadership of President Mahama has an overwhelming mandate. Okay, huge mandate. The margins of vote in terms of percentage is huge. We have not seen that in a very, very long time. Their number of seats in parliament is even a huge testament to the mandate that the Ghanaians have given them. So we can say that Ghanaians believed in the reset that they were talking about. Of course, there are other factors that influence how people vote, right? So there's a huge mandate that they have. So what can we expect, right? Number one, I've mentioned the experience of Mahama, right? Let's talk about some of the things that Mahama has pledged or talked about. He's talking about a lean government,
Mm-hmm.
right? My view is that Ghana, what we need is a credible leadership, not necessarily credible, credible like politicians, but a credible leadership, lean government, and efficiency in public service delivery. Of course, all of that, we can talk about corruption and all of that in there. He's talking about reset. So let's look at what are some of the things that we have even seen right away in the last few days. What we have seen is that they've brought about this oral operation, recover all loot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can go into that. But this is something that they brought up right even before the
Inauguration,
right?
Yeah.
Now, I've heard some people that say that where is that going to lead to? It is a duplication of activities that other institutions can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
My first response when I saw the creation of the oral was that this may be a good step in the right direction, but I don't like the fact that it's not institutionalized, right? So that's for me, it can be a problem. The personalities, we tend to focus on personality too much, right? And that could be a problem. But I think that the way they want to capture it, they want to send a message to Ghanaians that if you have any suspicion or evidence of corruption, right, take it to oral, and that oral will take it from there and share it with other corruption fighting institutions. So reset, here is what I think. Number one, all the promises that President Mahama has indicated or given to Ghanaians, he has only 4 years. Okay? He has only 4 years. I think that the kind of economic transformation that he's promising or he's promised is not likely to be fulfilled within 4 years.
Okay.
Right? That is not to say that he can make huge progress. Economic transformation and the inclusive productivity growth that he has been talking about will need probably more than 10 years and beyond. And it will also need some right things to be done consistently. One of the biggest problems in Ghana is that we are unable to do the right thing consistently for a long time. Okay, so and so that's one of the major concerns that I have, right? But I think he has the mandate from the people. Okay, he has the mandate from the people. He has the experience. he needs to, or he probably has the right people as well, given the nominations that we have already seen. The other thing, apart from the oral, we have also seen is that just this morning we noticed that he's put in place, or he's issued an executive instrument that reduces the number of ministries from 20 or from 30 to 23.
23, yeah.
That is consistent with the promise that he gave Ghanaians. He gave Ghanaians that he's going to have no more than 60 ministers, right? So now, assuming that every one of these ministries gets one minister, that's like 23 ministers already. If all of them should have deputy ministers, that is what, 46, right?
Okay.
46. So if you have 46, and then you're going to have regional ministers for every region, we have 16 regions. So that's going to be over 60. That's going to be like 62. So we are yet to see. So maybe he's not, maybe if he's going to stick with that promise of 60 minutes, not more than 60 ministers, then we are likely to see that maybe there are some ministries that
maybe some ministries won't have deputies.
Exactly. That's an option, right? Or some ministries won't have ministers. But
what about staffers?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
we'll come to that. Yeah.
So I think so. Lean government, he's promised that. Economic transformation, he's promised that, right? Lean government, we're already seeing some signs, reduction of the ministries. Economic transformation, I think he needs more than 4 years to be able to do that. Okay. But he should be able to. He should be able to, of course, work on the macroeconomic situation. But you see, he's going to put, or he's put Honorable Atuforsen in that position, finance minister. One of the things that I would caution against is that we tend to focus, when it comes to macroeconomic indicators and opening businesses, creating the private opportunities for businesses to thrive, we tend to focus more on foreign businesses, right? I think we need to focus on giving space to Ghanaian businesses from within on his industrialization path. The last thing I want to say is fighting corruption. And I know Uriko has a lot to say about this, because I think Uriko and I agree on going back to the basis when it comes to fighting corruption. But one thing that Mahama has promised is that he's talking about a code of conduct for public officials as a key priority. Okay. I have two things to say on that. There's a problem, Ghana's current system of fighting corruption, especially when it comes to public officials, on a code of conduct that he's talking about. There's a problem that I think there are gaps within the asset declaration system that we have right now. So I can briefly mention that, and then we can come back.
But I mean, the expectation is that he's going to address the issue of corruption, right?
Yeah.
So then perhaps those loopholes will be potentially filled.
Yeah, but what are the loopholes? That's what I want to speak to.
Okay.
Right? So we already have. The problem. One of the problems with Ghana is that we tend to pile on. Most of our problem is not really that we don't have the laws that govern the conduct of people's actions. It's just the enforcement of it and made loopholes within the system, right? Our asset declaration system is governed by Chapter 24 of the Constitution and Act 550. The problems that I see in this particular asset declaration system is that it has a very limited coverage in terms of which officers and individuals are covered under this system. Family, people, and associates are not necessarily covered under the liability and asset declaration of our current system. Okay. Right? So any code of conduct that Mahama is bringing on has to make sure that it extends the coverage beyond just the personalities, but also the associate and their families. I think that's important. Right?
So that they cannot acquire property and put it in their names.
And put it in their names, right? We've seen this. We've seen this over the years. The other one that is also interesting that I think we should pay attention to is the fact that officials only declare asset and liabilities every 4 years, right? That is too infrequent. We are unable to catch corruption early. If you have to wait for 4 years to do that, that is a problem. So I'm happy about the code of conduct for public officials that he's talking about. But I think the loopholes that he needs to take care of are those. Well, those I can think of two other things. For example, a lot of the declarations are not accessible to the public. And I know there are reasons why you may need to have confidentiality in that, right? But if you look at other jurisdictions like South Africa and what have you, there are aspects of the liability and asset declarations that are confidential and others that are public. So I think we need to be able to, in order for us to increase transparency and accountability, President Mahama's code of conduct for public officials should include asset and liability declaration, and it has to be extended beyond the personalities themselves.
Okay.
It has to be every year, I think. It also has to be accessible to the public, or at least portions of it. And we should, you see, the funny thing is that they only just declare. We don't have a system where we can actually go and verify the declarations, how accurate they are.
Yeah, but I think that's more of a systemic problem, because if we had a well-structured, tax filing system, when you file your tax, property tax, and everything, that information is collected, say that in the course of time, if property that you own, the amount of property that you own changes, then they are able to catch it. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of a system-wide inefficiency that exists rather than just the asset declaration regime itself. Right.
Yeah.
But I guess, you say President Mahama has a history of being a president.
Yes.
And that based on that history, what he has promised, he has the potential to deliver, because he's been in the role before, and then he knows what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
But also, yes, but also with respect to the overall reset or economic transformation, it might require more than 4 years to achieve.
Yes.
And so, you kind of take a middle ground with respect to whether, Ghanaians' expectations are going to be met with this transition, or they're going to be disappointed.
Oh, my view is that it's not so much of disappointment. It's just that the reality of the situation is that he's going to do something. He's going to get some things right. But the economic transformation that Ghanaians are expecting, it's not going to happen in 4 years.
Okay.
And bridging the gap, or taking people out of poverty and inequality is not going to happen within, I think it's not going to happen within, but immediate things, for example, the abolition of the e-levy and all those new sans taxes, that is going to have immediate impact on people's pocket, right? So they once he's able to remove them, they will feel it. My only problem is that have they count the cost of removing those benefits or those taxes? Because it's going to come back and bite them.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially with the concerns about the deficit that we have. Where is the money going to come from to take care of those taxes that will be removed? So,
okay. All right. Yeah. Let me go to Ivy on this. The expectations of Ghanaians, and where do you think it's all going to land?
Well, I don't know why politicians make so many promises, and then when they win the elections, they try to manage our expectations as to what to expect from them. So I liked when Ike said that have they counted the cost of removing certain nuisance taxes? Have they counted the cost of this resetting of our economic woes in the country? So I think that they have had 8 years of Nanado's administration to see where the loopholes are and to make informed manifesto promises. So I think that we should move beyond the point where politicians just make promises to us, and then we now try to manage the situation and say that, oh, they didn't count the cost, so this is what is actually on the ground. You should have known before you made the promises. So for me, I really expect a lot from this government. And first of all, on the term I'm talking, let me speak to media and the culture of silence, and then I'll talk about gender. So in the past, people have complained a lot that they couldn't say what they had to say. So even when we talk about free SHS, and people want to talk about how the policy needs to, we need to relook at the policy and see where we can make corrections and see where we can, review the policy in total. People could not talk about this because of the fear of maybe reprisals or fear of losing their job and all that. So Mahama being a media person, I expect to see more of that. And he has a track record of having a very open government where people are able to speak truth to power. So I expect to see those changes when it comes to media relations, opening up things so that people will make informed decisions or know what is happening in the government in terms of what is working and what is not working. Then I'll come to the gender issue, the gender equity issue. Most of the time, we all want some kind of representation, and we are happy that we've had representation in the highest echelons of power. Of course, we are still to see a woman president, but at least we have a woman vice president. But I feel that even when we have that representation, women need the support of women. Women in those places are usually very lonely. So they need the support of other women, or even the men who the man who is John Mahama who opened that door for us to have a female vice president, to also make like key appointments into key areas. So for instance, how past governments have handled the gender ministry has been very has not been helpful to us on the gender front. We see that most of the time we don't get technocrats, we just get somebody who just receives the position, and we don't see any meaningful changes. I'll take a few, like maybe a couple of gender ministers out of it, maybe and now a year later in the past government, in Mahama's government, who we really saw transformation in the gender ministry. But besides that, I don't really see much that they do in that niche. So we are hoping that they appoint key technocrats into those areas. Education. We saw Professor Jane Opokwajima in the education ministry in Mahama's former government, and we saw improvements in the education ministry during that time. So, and then for me, I attribute it to the fact that it's somebody who has been in education for many years and knows what she's doing in the education ministry. We saw the same thing in Anado's government, the former education minister, and not Napo, the one before Napo, or the one after Napo.
Yes.
Did a lot in the ministry. So it makes us see that if you put somebody who knows what they are doing, a technocrat, who is their field of work, we see changes. And then we have a vice president who is a woman, but we do not have the requisite number of women in parliament currently. So for me, we are just stuck at the same place. In the past government, we had 40 women. In this government, we have 40, and then one who is likely to join them, because whether it's the other, each party has a woman in those areas, so 41. So we didn't even move much when it comes to parliamentary seats. We are still at 14.5% or 14% in parliamentary seats. So we want in parliamentary, like those who won the parliamentary seats. So we want to see that in the ministries. So making his ministerial appointments, we want to see lots of women representation, women who know what they are doing, not just any woman, women technocrats, and there are a lot of them in the NDC, and there are a lot of them outside the NDC that they can draw on. The first two appointments were disappointing for me. The oral, when they brought the list of those who are going to do the oral, and the transition scene, we didn't see as many women. Recently, I think recently they did the parliamentary appointments committee, and there are two women and versus 13 or 11 men. Okay. So I can't say that I grow better if you're not. So we are holding them accountable. We want to see all the promises. But for me, what is most important to me is the gender promises, the equity, and that he promised us. We want to see it manifest in this government.
Okay. All right. So yeah, and then we'll talk deeply about the gender question when we come to interrogate Prof. Nana's historic election as the first vice president in the history of Ghana. But Oreku, let's continue on this tangent of the expectations and perhaps what you think should be the focal areas of the incoming administration.
For me, the expectation is justifiable. Like Ivy said, the promise a lot. And of course, Ghanaians were suffering. And the expectation of Ghanaians, to me, at any stretch, is justifiable. And we have to hold politicians accountable. But the reality, though, is the reality. Mahama is confronted with over 2 decades of managing our country as a Ponzi scheme. That is the reality. Reality whereby we have structural deficiencies. That is the reality. The reality of political patronage. That is the reality. And it's a reality that started from 1992, and it's part and part of our political culture till now. And these are some of the things Mahama would have to reset. It's not necessarily the economy per se. So if I am John Mahama, and that when you ask the question, this is how I thought of it. If I'm John Mahama, I have 4 years, what would I do? And for me, I will focus on governance. I think that's where Akufo-Addo's government failed. the governance arrangement of our country. And there are a lot of things Mahama can do without necessarily even focusing on changing the constitution or without focusing on constitutional review. There are so many things that Mahama can do. For example, the whole oral idea is good, but it is not enough. We've seen it before. We've seen it before where current administration only talk about corruption in the context of previous administration. And that is what ORA is doing.
Yeah.
It is purely all that corruption in previous administration. But they all know the reason and why those corruption arose.
Yeah.
They know it. All what they have to
So
do.
for instance, I saw a release, a statement by Martin Kwebu, who is a member of that committee, saying that the former national security boss acquired a land illegally. And when he was confronted about it by the committee, he promised to return it and that they are not going to proceed with any further, perhaps, prosecution.
Okay. Yeah,
so I was wondering to myself if the committee really has the mandate to decide as to whether it is enough to just for somebody to return something they allegedly have stolen without going through the prosecutorial process.
Yeah, I'll come there. I want to dodge your question a little bit because I want to be able to land my point. What I'm trying to say is that it is not enough to always go after the previous administration. We've seen that before. Kufuor did that. But what happened after that, they also did the same thing. So there's a loophole. The loophole is that we sell state lands to politically exposed people. So if you are really, really, really care about it, you stop it. Mahama now can easily stop that, take that away from the system, that politically exposed people under no circumstance should be allowed to buy state lands. Politically exposed people under no circumstance should be allowed to acquire state vehicles. You stop it. Then if you still want to pursue your aura, you can still go ahead and do it. But the whole idea that our governments come, they go after only the previous administration in the context of corruption, and they leave corruption to go on in their administration. Hopefully 8 years, another government will come and go for the previous 8 years corruption. That is a Ponzi in my candid opinion. So for me, if I'm John Mahama, I'll focus on governance and decentralization is key. We have one of the worst land tenure system and land administration in Africa. If we are able to empower our decentralized administration system, and we are able to ensure that land administration is part and parcel of how chiefs and stool lands and all those lands are sold and administered. And if we are able to ensure that our local government system is really working well, the way it ought to be, we will be fine. Another issue of governance is revenue generation. You see, anytime we talk about programs in Ghana, those programs, in as much as it might be good, like free education and the rest, at the same time, those programs are the channels of corruption. So if you don't have a good governance arrangement, you might be doing something that you think is good, but that same thing will breed a lot of corruption, and over time, you will not even have money to sustain it. So we need to think about income generation. And during the campaign, all what we heard was promises of A, B, C, D, but no government was really talking about how we're going to expand the income generation, how we're going to make sure that a lot of Ghanaians are brought into the tax net. It is not a comfortable conversation. And you can only do that effectively when you also reset your governance architecture. Talk about issues of Supreme Court. I've heard a lot of these legal luminaries in court talking about we should put a ceiling on the Supreme Court judges. We should do that. There are a lot of things we can go around with governance, a proper governance system. I've had a conversation deeply with you, Mark, on some of these issues of Supreme Court appointment. And I decided to check. And I really don't blame the current packing of the Supreme Court. It is a product of the governance
System.
system we have. We have a system where every case in Ghana can travel to the Supreme Court. So if every case that you take to court, if I have an issue with you on land, and that case can travel to the Supreme Court, then the current Supreme Court judges we have really is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not enough. So until we change that governance system, we always going to see presidents packing the Supreme Court, and it's not packing because there are a lot of petty things that ought to be done at the Supreme Court where you need more judges. So what do you do about it? You change it.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's not every case that should go to the Supreme Court. So you redefine the governance arrangement of the Supreme Court. What is the true function of the Supreme Court? What are some of the things the Supreme Court has to do?
Okay, so you think that if Mahama is able to transform the governance arrangements, the outcomes will be visible enough for Ghanaians to say that he has been successful in his administration?
I think he would leave a legacy that Ghanaians would look back immediately, will look back and say, this man has done a great job. He will also be in the books of posterity. Because, Mark, let me look at issues of procurement. We have a lot of laws on procurement, but what is lacking is the governance arrangement of procurement and staying true to the arrangement we have. A lot of this corruption we're talking about happens at that level of procurement. And recently I was listening to the attorney general, the auditor general who was fired. What's his name? I forgot his name.
Domulevo.
Yeah, Domulevo. Fantastic submission. I listened to it. It was a 1.5 hour conversation, and I took time and listened to him. And the insight he gave, it came down to governance. And it's not that the auditors are working, they are really doing their job. And if you do a content analysis of all Auditor General reports from 2008 to now, they have always raised issues that any serious president can take, use it, and start looking at the loopholes and filling it. Okay. So we have huge challenges when it comes to income generation. And I want to throw this out there. If I'm Mahama, I will also think about disappointing some people in my own political circles. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, you're not doing a good job. Because take it or leave it, about 90% of the people that follow our political parties, both MPP and NDC, are looking for direct material gains.
Okay. Personal interest.
Yeah. And in that case, if Mahama is to really reset, he has to prepare to disappoint some people, that not all people are going to get what they're going to get. And he has to also disappoint people and some of his promises. If I'm Mahama, I'm not going to cancel e-levy. And it was a nuisance tax then. It has come to stay and it should stay. The same way Akufo-Addo made a mistake by bringing in the nursing allowance. Mahama did a good job by taking the political fallout, by taking out the nursing allowance.
Okay.
If I was
I know you're a Reagan Democrat, so
I would have apologized and say, hey, I didn't know, like what Kufuor did, and that's why I like Kufuor. I didn't know better. It really bringing in a lot of money. We will keep it. Kufuor did the same thing to Get Fund. Okay. They went on demonstrations on Get Fund. When he came and realized that if we take Get Fund out, we will not get money to build schools, he kept it.
Okay.
And those are the things that Mahama, betting tax. If I'm Mahama, I will keep it. And we should tell you that any politician who will promise you that you can get rich out of betting is lying to you.
Yeah.
So if these are things that he has to keep in order to get money for other things. So I think you want to cut me. So
So I mean, I want us to transition to the potential hurdles that the administration would face, especially introducing this idea of oral Operation Recover or Loot. We normally talk about the campaign finance problems that we have. A lot of financiers have financed these campaigns, and there are expectations. They are hoping that the person they financed would create an opportunity for them to recover the money that they put in the campaign. Essentially, campaign financing in Ghana is more or less an investment. This has reared its head as a challenge to many administration in addressing some of these problems. So I want us to talk about the challenges in general and how you think, the Mahama administration can overcome them. Oreku already tackled on this issue of disappointing perhaps people who are hoping to be appointed to certain positions. But yeah, Sylvia, let's delve into some of the challenges and perhaps how they could be overcome.
I think Mahama has already disappointed, to Eroeku's point, disappointed people because he's reduced the number of ministries, which means that some of those people who were expecting to fill some of those positions aren't going to fill them. And I also think that in terms of, disappointing, that is a given, I think, in any particular governance system. Now, in talking about corruption, one of the things that I want us to also bear in mind is that corruption is not an Africa-only problem, right? The thing that you just talked about, Agana, in terms of campaign promises, campaign donations back in a way, it happens everywhere, and we see it. We know, the appointment of Elon Musk in the United States couldn't be a more glaring example of what it means to support a party that then comes to power. The very basic definition of politics, and I'm going to keep coming back to this, is really what happens in these circles, who gets what, when, and how. So what is important, and I think all of us are touching on that, is that we need to strengthen our governance structures such that we are able to, from the get-go, hold people to account. Ike, you talked about, asset declaration not being frequent enough, and I do agree with you. You declare at the beginning of your administration, or at the beginning of the first 4 years, and then we only hear from you in another 4 years. That's too long if you are in government. I, however, disagree that if we are going to also tackle corruption, that circle of the people who declare assets has to be widened, because how do you cut that off? In Ghana, where you have extended family relations going into the hundreds, are you going to ask anyone connected with a minister to declare their assets? And what does association mean? Am I going to be asked to declare my assets if one of my mates from Legon suddenly becomes minister? And I'm going to clearly push against that. I don't think we need to go that far to be able to hold people to account, right? So those are the things that, we, for instance, there are other, as you've indicated, we do have the laws. This is the thing. We have policies. It's not for lack of ignorance. It's not for lack of research. All of these things that we are talking about really are repetitions of things that have been researched, that have been written and beautifully documented, that we are not really implementing. There are conflict of interest rules and regulations everywhere. And I think sometimes that is the enforcement of those is the difference in different countries in terms of how monies get lost or get stolen or get, apportioned in very questionable characters. So to talk about, the reset, going back to reset in answering your questions, your questions, is that one of the legacies I think Mahama can leave, and I think he's proven that also, and it's one that I'm already giving to him, is that under his regime, we see a very robust civil society engagement in government, right? That is something that we can credit Mahama for. And that is fantastic. So in a cynical kind of way, I'm laughing about all of the people who went quiet during the last 8 years, who are going to suddenly come out and talk about any little thing Mahama does. But that's fantastic, right? Because that also tells us that we are always going to have these receipts to go off on. An open government and a robust civil society organization really is also an important mark of our democracy. But there's also one thing in terms of people being able to express disappointment and governments actually listening, right?
Okay.
Because that's the point. If we can all point out these errors and they just go about business as usual, there's no punishment. And so in terms of the oral, then, this is why I think, for me, it's also important, Oreku said it, that we also need to hold the current administration responsible as things are going. And I think that Mahama, knowing very well that this is the last time he's going to be president and always seeing himself as a statesman, I think that, he should clamp down hard on any one of his ministers or appointees that is corrupt, to send a message, a very clear message. Because at the end of the day, what you are leaving is your legacy. What you leave with in terms of governance is your legacy. We are talking about Nkrumah today, not because of some of the things that he did within the cabinet, because of the vision, and the implementation of that vision. So I think that, for me, some of those immediate things are those little things. But oral, it's like a funeral, right? In our African parlance, we don't perform funerals really, and not necessarily for the dead, right? But they are also
For the
a
living.
reminder for the living that this is in some ways how your own funeral is going to be. And you have people who plan their funerals who say, oh, it would be lovely for me to be celebrated this way. And because of that, at least if we follow traditional African philosophies, people live well, right? Just so that their funerals can actually attest to how well they lived. Now, the other thing is, in terms of the research, and for me, one of the things that I was hearing in the message that he said, and one thing that I am then hoping that they do is that they move away from the old ways of doing business, because that clearly hasn't served us well.
Like what?
Isaac is the China expert, so I'm going to let him. But we've seen a transformation in China in 40 years. Go to Shanghai, and you see those skyscrapers, you see the lights, you see the transformation there, and that happened within 40 years, in the lifetime of people. So people see what can happen. They are not waiting for another 100 years. They are not hoping that their great-grandchildren see this. Same with issues of gender equity. We cannot always just be saying, oh, it's going to be so gradual. But the point I am making is, in terms of doing business differently or doing things differently, is that our over-reliance on Western models needs to shift, right? I think we need to have different kinds of conversations about those things that actually work for us. And we need to build strategic partnerships with people who have our interest at heart. And I think that we need to start to take a leadership role again. I mean, it's hard when you are literally in a begging position all of the time. But a lot of this, this position that we find ourselves in on the continent is really as a result of our own doing. I mean, if we see the massive monies that we lose just to corruption, that alone could show us. And that is why, for me, my message really is that if we do not strengthen ourselves as a continent, strengthen our collective trading as a continent. It's all well and good when we sit in Ghana and talk about ourselves, and but we are a very small country. We are
All right. Okay, Sylvia.
and our power of negotiation, I'll finish that point,
Yeah.
and our power of negotiation is that much small compared to, for instance, if we could negotiate things on block. Right. And I think that is something that we keep losing sight of. That's one of the biggest things and biggest challenges that we keep coming back to in a very roundabout way. Right. I think Isaac had talked about the fact that we need to create an enabling environment, to use that very fantastic word, for Ghanaian businesses to thrive. Just recently, Kantamanto burned down, and all of us, I think, at least in this panel, know Kantamanto. I do research on Kantamanto and all of that. We know how much the generation, how much that place generates in terms of revenue alone, right? Take all of the markets, the collective markets, the informal sector, what we like to refer to as the informal sector. And what it means if we could boost, and what it means if we could actually support people in these places. Now, one of the things that I was listening to the news, and I'll just end on that point because I don't want to go on and on. When they were interviewing the victims of the people who had lost everything in Kantamanto, people weren't there to beg. They were like, give us something to start off with. They were actually asking for loans. They weren't going to say, give us money, give us, just give us. They were talking about the fact that they needed support to reset, to use the word, to reset. And I think that is what African governments need to start to do. This whole thing of begging for everything and donor support when it comes to especially critical areas of our economies is something that we need to look at critically and carefully. Now, sorry, just one more point before I hand over the baton. In terms of resetting things, I think we also need to have a certain predictability, right? You cannot do business, you cannot ask people to invest in anything when there is no predictability in any sector of the economy. When government comes in, some of the things that were even if these things were good, we just throw them away, in part because maybe we made very different campaign promises, and maybe because some of those things were started as avenues for people to loot, right? So there's also that, it's also important for these, for governments to be transparent. And Ivy, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, just because I think that now that a new administration has come in, and it always happens, they read the books and they notice that even what we thought we knew, right, may not be everything. And so sometimes they will say, yes, this wasn't what, but I think in the, one of the things that we are calling for me, is transparency. We need to know when our students are going back to school. We need to plan. You can't be giving 1 week to parents to just suddenly, get their children back to school. And free HSS, I did say I'll end on one note. Free HSS, I think, is something that we can reformat properly. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bath water. There are huge operational challenges, and I think that there's a way in which we can, maybe as Isaac had predicted, it may not happen in these 4 years, but we should be working towards the fact that free HSS is here to stay. I think that there are lots of largesse, government largesse, that we can cut down on to ensure that, because we are also not talking about the kind of free HSS where I was recently listening to Professor Adumako Ampofo and others in the university sectors, where you just train people, literally pushing them out through a system. I mean, we are talking about quality. So let's emphasize on the quality of things. It's not so much as we are doing this. What is the quality of that particular thing, right? And those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to in terms of, the reset, in terms of accountability and the oral. I think that, it's good enough that people know that when they leave power, and they will eventually leave, that people will follow up on their misdeeds and find them accountable, or that we are asking for accountability, or that they be punished accordingly for breaking the laws of the land.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was just going to say that, there's a certain level of distaste for parading intellectuals to espouse theoretical and philosophize without giving concrete, practical solutions to problems, right? I just got a message from one of our viewers who said that I've assembled people with doctors in front of their names.
My answer to this is that, again, the thing is that it's not because these philosophies or philosophical things are just as important. And again, it's not that we do not have those concrete ideas. If I sit here and I say that I want Mahama to appoint someone directly in charge of Pan-Africanism, that is a concrete idea in my view.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Is that going to happen? Has that not been suggested before? Did Nkrumah not start this? So I think part of this is to remind ourselves that we need to, because at the end of the day, if we do not dream, if we don't have a dream of what it is that we want to eventually get to, the everyday things are just as important as having a vision and setting an agenda for ourselves in this particular country. And I think that it is those long-term visions that great nations, any great nation, aspires to or becomes great from, in terms of how they deal with those everyday issues. I mean, if you're looking for very concrete things in terms of what to do, one of the first things to do is to really throw your weight behind market women in that country, right? You have all the markets in that country. What kinds of supports do we really give to women in marketplaces to ensure that their contributions to our economy is what it needs to be? The other thing, I've said it concretely, is to appoint 50% women. So yes, I think I'm also doing some of the concrete things that people are talking about.
Yes, you are. Samia, you are.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted us to be mindful about that, because somebody sent me a strong worded message about the idea of having a more rhetorical approach to some of our problems in Ghana. And so when we are talking about them, let's also think about potential concrete solutions that we could suggest to those on the ground, the street level bureaucrats to put in place or to put into practice.
Well, let me just add quickly to what Sylvia said about the comment somebody just passed. But the fact that we have doctors in front of our names doesn't mean we've not been on the ground before. I mean, I was a journalist many years before I became a professor. So People shouldn't assume that we are talking from a rhetorical point of view. We are also adding very concrete things that the presidency can do or the governments can do to make things better for all of us.
Okay. All right. So Ike, let me hear you on the hurdles, right? The
Yeah.
potential pitfalls that this administration has to overcome to achieve what it has enunciated as its vision for the future.
See, I have I've been very critical of our governance system, not because I don't see the progress we've made, but I think that the average Ghanaian is growing impatient with our democracy. And of course, when you give them the option, they will vote. And use that as an accountability measure, right? The reason why I keep saying that is, and why I term the literature as democracy without governance, is basically we have a situation where democratic institutions and processes, including elections that we just had, does not come with effective governance in terms of accountability, rule of law, service delivery, and efficient administration. And that, because when those things I think are either absent or weak in the Ghanaian system, and that is creating a disconnection. So one of the biggest hindrance, right, is that we are not practicing. We are picking and choosing aspect of democracy that we are practicing. We have been very loud on participation in terms of involving people in decision making or voting. We have been very silent when it comes to specific area like accountability. You see, let me give you an example of one of the biggest or one of the silly mistakes I think that the present government has done, right? And that really speaks to the bigger issue of how our system is, institutions are such that it can easily be sucked in. We have a president elect. This is before the swearing in. A president elect that sends a letter or a message and says that is mandating the MPP,
The NDC,
sorry, the NDC
parliamentarians too.
parliamentarians to vote or to elect Speaker Bagbin as the next speaker. And then the Speaker Bagbin also uses Parliament's letterhead to respond thanking the president. I think that is unacceptable. The Constitution is very clear on how we get members, a Speaker of Parliament. Yes, you can talk about the president having an influence on who becomes a Speaker of Parliament, but it should not be that the president-elect is mandating who should become the Speaker, and not only at the back door, but issues a public statement to that effect. And the Speaker, who is no longer a Speaker at that time, or ought not to be the Speaker, responds to thank him by using the Parliament letterhead. These are administrative things that I think are avoidable. Yes, like I said, you can say that the president has a role, and maybe they have been doing that behind the scenes. But if we really want to practice the checks and balances on our system, the executive and the legislature, some of these things shouldn't be happening. So one of my fears is that one of the biggest hindrance that the President Mahama is going to have is the nature of how our institutions are, for example, especially our accountability institutions and governance institutions. If you are not careful, they will suck you into the status quo. So the reset is not going to happen. My understanding of reset is that you are starting something afresh. And it's going to be difficult because some structures are already in place. And you're going to just continue with it that way. And so the reset is problematic. It's going to be problematic because there are certain things that you have to cut down or get away with before you can actually present something that is unique, different from what we already know. You see, the other thing that I also notice is that and Agana, you and I have been talking about this before. The Ghanaian political party, as much as they have been very instrumental in the Fourth Republic, but they are also becoming so powerful. The political parties are so powerful that they literally dictate a lot of the things that happens within constitutional institutions like Parliament. We have a Parliament where the leadership of parliament is literally decided by political parties. Of course, I agree that the members who are in parliament come on the ticket of their political parties, but I think there should be where we should have a clear delineation and about where their powers end and where they start.
Yeah.
I'm not saying these things just as theoretical issues, but I'm saying this because I think fundamentally Ghana is practicing democracy, like I mentioned last week, with Ghanaian characteristics. The democracy we have in Ghana is shaped by practices that are largely deviate from the core principles of transparency, accountability, and equality that are typically associated with robust democracies.
Yep.
And that, I think, that's where we need to work on. The other last point that I think I also want to mention that could be a big hindrance is that, see, if you look at the performance of the MPP under President Akufo-Addo, and I think Ivy mentioned this, that a lot of people were concerned about speaking publicly and being cautious that you may get into trouble, right? One of the problems that led to the downfall of the MPP was that they didn't give a lot of attention to dissenting voices of views.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. In some extent, they were governing. It was almost tone deaf to some of the critical issues that everybody could see, but except the leadership of President Akufo-Addo and Bawumia, who did not see it. Right. Take the case of the finance minister, for example. Everybody knew that there was something wrong. He needed to go. Even members of their party knew that there was something wrong, but then they were not listening to dissenting voices. One of the critical things that I think separate the Ghanaian democracy, which is a positive thing, from others, is that we have a history of strong civil society groups over the years. Go back to the
press
1890s.
freedom as well. Yeah.
Yeah, from the Aboriginals' right protection society up to one of the things that we have as advantage is that we have a critical mass of people that express their views and that are very vocal. I think that the MPP government was very closed the door to dissenting views, especially from civil society groups. And knowing who Mahama is in terms of his previous experience, he is open to dissenting views. And I'm hoping that that would help him if he's able to listen to the other side, because I remember he holding the Century consensus, right? The economic planning meeting where a lot of these civil society groups met there and developed. That was basically the plan that we took to the IMF when during his time, right? So you need to build a critical mass of people that do not necessarily agree with the political party's position. Okay, so I think three things that are going to be a big hindrance, right? Institutions are themselves there's already a wheel that gets them in. Oriko was talking about procurement. That's a big cash cow. That's a big problem, right? Political parties, again, the NDC party has to somehow give Mahama some room. Otherwise, we're going to see the same problem that we have seen over the years.
All right. Okay. So let me go to Ivy. Maybe you have to leave, and then if you give us your concluding remarks. But I think I gave us a segue into this suppression of media freedom under Akufo-Addo, which appears to be very unique in the history, if we put it in the context of Ghanaian democracy, or even the periods of undemocratic rule, right? There's always been some relative level of press freedom. Now, others have actually attributed John Mahama's loss in 2016 to the fact that he had an open door policy, so to speak, for people like Manasseh to access certain information within his administration and put it out there. Do you see a potential sort of pull back in opening the doors for press freedom, or is he going to learn from the mistakes of this administration and probably maintain his personality? That is somebody who is, a dyed-in-the-wool advocate of press freedom.
Okay, thank you. I don't think that there's anything wrong with transparency because the media is the fourth estate. So I actually think that the more transparent you are, the more you build trust in people. People realize that there's really nothing to hide. So I think that thing that people say Mahama opened the door too wide, It's probably those who feel like maybe it was party issues that they should close up on, but issues of national interest should be open. And we have a right to information bill passed, so people are supposed to have information on what is pertaining to government. But to because I'll be leaving immediately after this, I just want to say that Obama said that we need strong institutions as Africans, and I want to retrace that we need that, and that is how. And most of the panelists have already talked about how we need strong institutions to make sure that we don't repeat this government does not repeat the problems or the mistakes that previous governments did. President Mahama has started very well. He wants to reduce the number of ministers he has. And then recently he said that they are not going to print any portraits of the president. So they just give a digital copy. They're not going to give anybody any contract. So of course, and then there will be a lot of disappointments. The first disappointment has been the first dinner that we see people going all over social media complaining that they were not invited to that dinner. But there will be many more. And I feel that the president is in a very unique position to leave a legacy because he doesn't have anything to lose personally. He's done his 4 years. He's not campaigning for another 4 years. It is his party that has something to lose. But if he needs to, if he has to leave a legacy, he will need to be a president for the nation and not a president for his party, in quotes. And that's the only, he should have the mindset that he's going to disappoint some people. If he's going to help the country build strong institutions, party people would not be happy, but they should be concerned about leaving a legacy as a statesman who transformed our economy within 4 years. Even if he doesn't achieve everything, at least his 4 years would have been accounted for, just like we all account for the 8 years of the NDC before the NPP came in, and then we try to separate what Prof. Mills did versus what John Mahama did. If he has to leave a legacy, he has to make sure that he is ready to disappoint party faithfuls and then make sure that we have strong institutions going forward. And that would be something that other governments can build upon in the future. Okay, so sorry I have to leave.
Yeah.
Sorry, just before you run off, Ivy, I just wanted to point out that statement from Obama didn't age very well. I mean, the White House of all things, but anyway, it's an interesting thing to now point out.
Okay. Well, I mean, so Ivy, thanks a lot for joining us. And then again, I'm sure we're going to have you on again sometime soon.
Thank you for having
me. Yes. So yeah, by Sylvia, I'll just let you continue because we want to conclude here. I had wanted us to talk about the historical, election of Prof. Jane as the first female vice president, its implication in terms of representation, but also the hope for the girl child across, maybe beyond the shores of Ghana. You are a huge advocate in this area, and so I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment on that, but also the issue of the diaspora. Many of us left Ghana with the hope of going back, at least me, but that hasn't happened yet. Do you think that there should be a deliberate policy by this government and perhaps succeeding governments to attract their talent back home? Do we have enough talent back home such that the issue of brain drain is no longer an issue? Because I don't even hear about it anymore. Right. So maybe you can touch on these two issues as your concluding remarks, and then.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for this. And the fact that we now have a female vice president is something to jubilate. I mean, I would have hoped that as one of the countries that is mentioned when we talk about democratic growth on the continent, that we would have by now have had the first, female president. I mean, we've done it in other countries that are less renowned as far as democracy is concerned. But, this is a start. And I think it means a lot. It means a lot in terms of the fact that in the end, it's a result of work that women have done over the years to propel Jane to this space. And I said in the last discussion that we probably need to see this, or not that we probably need to see this. I think it's important for other political parties to emulate this fine example, that we have representation at the, flag bearership level. But as we are also seeing, it's not just about having someone in that position. It is about cutting across in every other position. I mean, that argument is long dead if we are talking about actual capabilities. And this is one of the reasons I was actually really happy to hear the president talk about the fact that we have to remove these systemic barriers. Because if we don't do that, and, in looking at how we reset, doing things differently, we really need to be talking about talent, the people who are most qualified, as opposed to what, whether they are male, female, whether they are from here or there, who they want to love, etc., etc. So I think that these kinds of things are important in terms of inclusivity, right? And also when we talk about democracy, and you're talking about half of your population that is not fairly represented, then you do have a crisis of democracy. We just don't always want to talk about these kinds of things. So in terms of symbolic representation, it is really important. But what we also want to start to see is measuring substantive gains that actually happens when you have proper representation in all aspects of governance across board. So I think that this is important, and I hope that, as time goes on, that it becomes something that we talk about. It's important to also mention that we now have an affirmative action law, right? And so in terms of accountability, this is one of the things that we are going to be holding this current administration to, in terms of fulfilling, what is actually outlined in the affirmative action bill, for me, are low-hanging fruits that I think that this administration can very easily, achieve. In terms of, what it means for not just the girl child, and I think I want to be very deliberate in this particular response. I think it's what it means for posterity, what it means for the example that it also sets for the boy child, because it's important that we make people see examples of different things. That if we are talking about equality and equity, we just don't talk about it theoretically. Well, here's the thing about not just talking theoretically, that we actually see these things in practice. Now on diaspora, because we are running out of time, the previous administration, to all intents and purposes, started something really significant as far as, for me again, and I'll come back to my Pan-Africanist spiel, is, that year of return in, 2019. Again, if you remove the politics from it, that ideal is significant in trying to reunite us all, with an ideal or an idea that people can come home, irrespective of when they left the continent. The first slave ships left the continent over 400 years ago. But this open invitation for the diaspora. And of course, so then when you talk about the diaspora, the Ghanaian diaspora, I'm not just talking about the immediate diasporas. I think for me, it extends beyond that. Like, how do we welcome anyone, any African, anyone at all who has what it takes to help develop our nation or our continent back home? So I think that those elements in that, the ideals in that year of the return are things that we can look at again very properly. I think we've stopped talking about brain drain. We now talk about brain circulation, right? Sometimes I'm asked, when will you go back home? And I say, well, I've only ever worked in Canada as an adult. I've actually never held a job or worked in Ghana as an adult, right? Yep. And so even when, you talk about going back home, home is now also, and I don't want to get into the weeds of it, what it means to go back home, what it means to, but I think a lot of us contribute to Ghana. And I'm expecting that, we don't only contribute with remittances, which a lot of us do. And so we feel it when the economy is bad because, yep. You are constantly supporting more and more people. But I think we also contribute intellectually to the growth and development of our country. Many of us do collaborative projects with people at home. And the other thing is that we also have a very vibrant, active Ghanaian diaspora, by the way. And so all the ways in which, the government can attract people and make these kinds of things institutionalized again, so that people can return. or contribute their own quota without it being, very highly politicized in various ways. So I think that, now we have Dirty December. That's a whole other conversation I think that we can have, because this idea of, the return has kind of merged into this thing of, just come for entertainment. And that by itself isn't bad if it attracts the necessary sort of investment or interest in Ghana, even as a gateway to the rest of the continent. But for me, I think in building the diasporan connections, we want to also build it in a way that connects us to other Africans. And this was one of the things that the president talked about, that our neighbors, the people that are our neighbors on the borders are our siblings, right? And so in terms of our international relations, we are not just dealing with other people who are in a different country. We are dealing with some of our relatives who are on the other side of the border. So I think that all of those kinds of things, for me, as someone who now lives in the diaspora, are really key and critical. I don't think I've ever felt far away from Ghana. Fortunately, I have never been deterred from, going to Ghana, except in December, where because of Dirty December, I cannot afford a plane ticket anymore, and the rest of it. But I think that what it is that we all have we have goodwill. And the renewed hope. People were joking that Gen Zs have now seen what independence celebrations felt like. But I think that we need to carry this renewed hope, with a very robust sort of civil society that is fair in terms of judging things for our country, and actually also advocating wherever we find ourselves. A lot of us, we do this thing where we are very careful about how we don't wash our dirty linen in public, because that is already washed enough, outside the continent. And so we should be able to do these criticisms so that we can build at home. But, what I am looking forward is that we move away from a very narrow Western-led perceptions or, ideas about development, and really do things that will benefit our people. Thank you very much.
All right. So, Oreku, again, back to the question of Prof. Jane's election. Is it a symbolic tokenism? Does it have some material implications on our whole goal to sort of bridge the gap between males and females in terms of real opportunities? And on top of that, I have a question from our common friend, Yao Amwako. He says that I should ask you what role you think Ghanaians in the diaspora should play in the reset agenda of the Mahama administration.
Oh my God, these are all big questions. I think the vice president role is what we as Ghanaians and the president would like to make of it. The vice president doesn't really have the way our system is established. It's to support and assist the president. But in terms of she being a woman, that symbolism is great. It is an aspiration, that a hope that will be given to a lot of young girls, a lot of women, a lot of people in our society, that if you work hard, diligently, if you pursue an ambition, you will be able to get it. And that one day we are getting closer and closer to getting a woman president. So for me, it is good, it is great, and she's competent by all standards. And I used to, before even social media, I used to follow her, not follow her in terms of follow her, but I used to listen to some of her lectures, because I've always been a fan of language and linguistics and all those things. So I remember when she was appointed as the first woman vice chancellor, it was something that my young self, I noted it somewhere in my notebook those days when I used to follow Ghana news a lot when I was back home. So of course there's some symbolism aspect of it, there is an inspirational aspect of it, but tokenism will be something that we will make of it. The president can decide that, yes, I appointed you in that office because I wanted to get a woman vote, and after that you are done and the door is shut. But we can also see her as opening the door, and the door will forever be open for more people to get in. There was a fantastic research that was done in the 80s, when the affirmative action of women were going on. And one organization appointed some women. And when the organization realized that when these women came in, they were not really performing. And they contacted a Harvard professor to do a research. And that Harvard professor came to a conclusion that the only way these women can perform is you have to appoint more women. You have to, in order to get them doing their job well, you have to bring in more women on board. So this comes down to politics. If you really want to see Nana Jane's support success, we have to get more women. We have to get more women in key strategic positions so that the one woman up there will not be lonely. The one woman out there will be able
There's always
to,
the frat boy culture within certain organizations that
so
prevent,
that she's not compelled to establish friendship when she doesn't want to. She's not compelled to smile at every joke when she doesn't want to. But if you're alone and you are the only person in that arena, you realize that at times you laugh at things that you don't want to laugh at because you're alone and you still want people to still have your appeal. Yeah. I think on the issue of diaspora, I think we contribute a lot, but I think our political parties, both NDC and NPP, and I'm going to be political here, especially NDC, is kind of scared of the diaspora a little bit. And that's why ROPA, as of now, hasn't been implemented. I think we've come to an age where we should be allowed to vote as Ghanaians. We are Ghanaians. It doesn't matter whether we hold a blue passport, red passport, or whatever. ROPA was passed so many years ago. The political temperature at that time, the opposition at that time vowed against it, that we would never allow Farijan to implement it. So the law was tweaked a little bit and said, anytime the EC want to implement, the EC should go ahead and implement. The EC, subsequent ECs are scared to implement that. But I think we have to do that. That is the political angle. Political angle, I think we have to allow all of us to vote because we are Ghanaians and we are part and parcel of the political system. On the other part of the economic, that is where all those things that Sylvia outlined comes in. We contribute in so many ways through remittances, and also I like the fact that Ghanaians not Ghanaians, Black people generally abroad or in the diaspora, from Brazil to Caribbeans to US, are going back home. And recently, my man Omar Johnson took Ghanaian citizenship. That's remarkable. At least it gives them some sense of belonging, that we are from this particular place. We have touched the motherland. And one of the most wicked thing that transatlantic slavery did to some of our brothers and sisters in the Americas, the fact that it denied them the opportunity to forever know where they
trace their roots. Yeah.
At least if they had allowed them to maintain their names, if they didn't change their names, because they changed their names because they saw them as commodities, if they had allowed them to even keep their names, by now we would have at least comfortably traced them. So that, to me, is a sad episode in our Black history. And if at least the symbol of getting citizenship in Ghana is something that John Mahama should continue, it's something that we should have.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, Ike, to you, the same question to you with respect to Prof. Nana's election, as well as the role of the diaspora in the overall development of, Ghana and perhaps the entire Africa.
Yeah. I mean, so I believe that obviously this is not the first attempt that we've had a woman trying to get into the presidency, right? We have had other women actually run for president, right, in Ghana, and they haven't been successful. And so, there are so many factors that makes this possible, right? The caliber of person that we are getting there and the political party they represent. But this achievement that Prof has had is very, it goes beyond the symbolism, right? It was very beautiful for me to watch when she was being sworn in by another female Chief Justice, right? And I mean, those of us who have girls, right? I'm the only man in the only boy in this house, so it's the optic, the representation alone, it's big. And so I was very excited for her and for all other Ghanaian girls and women. But it's also interesting to note that she didn't get here just because she's a woman, right? She's had very impressive record over the years, and I think it tells us something that in our Ghanaian politics, we have to be paying attention to making sure that we have the social policies, right, that makes it possible for women to achieve their best. Achieve their best and to contribute their best. And I think this is a very important win for us. And of course, she's academic, right? So it's not, we don't only talk, we don't only do the talk, but we do the do as well. But an interesting connection to Professor Nana Jane Opukwajiman, right? Both the outgone Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, and the new Vice President, Prof, share a Canadian connection. So that's the diaspora. That's the diaspora component of it, right? As we know, Prof and her PhD from York University, where Sylvia is, right? And Dr. Bawumia and her PhD from Simon Fraser University, also here in Canada. So there's already that's the diaspora question that I'm trying to come to.
Okay,
right?
yeah, you're linking it up.
An important one, right? Because I mean, a lot of people, when they talk about diaspora contribution, I think a lot of people just focus on going, being on the ground to be involved in politics and all of that. That's a key component of it. But I'm saying that having had a training here, their PhD training here, I think it introduced some dimension to their knowledge and their experience, and I think they would bring it on board in their, or she would bring it on board in terms of her work as a vice president. But I've observed something that is also, I think, is important for us to take a look at when it comes to getting people in the diaspora to be practically involved in governance in terms of running for office, right? I think we should be able to look beyond just running for office as one of the ways that diaspora can contribute to Ghana's progress. I think we have a very partisan nation, right? We politicize almost everything. Every issue, every event is politicized. Almost all discussions on national issues are reduced to NDC, MPP, right? And I think that's not always useful. A lot of people don't want that kind of approach to our governance. I think it should be possible for us to have contributions either from in Ghana or from the diaspora that does not necessarily have to be tagged NDC or NPP, right? And that maybe I'll come to that as my conclusion. But the other thing I want to also mention is that like Sylvia mentioned, there's a strong presence of diaspora political party presence here, right? In Canada, in UK, and what have you. In fact, when I held the event, the Ghana election event before the election, I got to know that leadership of the MPP in Canada had been given specific constituencies in Ghana for them to not only just go and campaign, but to fund the activities in those constituencies. So one of my speakers actually spoke, even though she was based in Canada here, at the time of the event, she was in Ghana campaigning on the ground and contributing to the discussion from there. So that's another dimension of it. But I was making reference to an observation that I've made, which is about the partisan nature of our policies is such that not everybody has become comfortable with the political process, right? In terms of the two big NDC, MPP, right? And so that, I mean, I have a lot to say on that because I think there is a lot in there. But the other dimension of diaspora is that, I mean, it's not, like I said, it's not only about politics, right? Diaspora in the Ghanaian diaspora can also, and we have been doing this, mobilize and engage in business investment and opportunities, right? We are here, we have become gatekeepers, how we advise students who want to study abroad. We do that. That's part of growing the human resource, right? I don't think it's necessarily, I see Oreku laughing there, but I don't think it's necessarily brain drain in that sense, right?
But I think the question is legitimate. That Sylvia and you should go home. I think Sylvia. I think Sylvia said somebody said they should go home and work.
But why though? That's the question you also have to ask. It's not
but
for
I think that's the. I think
of
on a lighter note, that's legitimate. When your brains are shared online, is different from if Nana hadn't gone home, Nana wouldn't have been where she is now. So so we need a lot of people to go home. And
yeah, but you know how Sylvia also said home. Anyway, but you see, yes, we need a lot of people to go home. Is it because of shortage of
precisely
of leaders in Ghana that we don't have? I don't think that's the problem.
But it also contributes to the diversity that we talked about, right? It shouldn't be only in terms of the historically identified categories of social difference, but also some of the things that have emerged, such as differences in educational backgrounds and stuff like that. I think that can enrich the overall governance of our country.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I mean, Oroko, as you know, some of us have gone home before, right? and then we came back, and the rest is history. But you never know.
Okay, so then perhaps maybe we have to tackle some of those issues, right? Because we know people who have gone back, and due to conditions that they faced, they had to make a return. So.
Well, I mean, and there's there's a lot of research on return migrations and what happens when people go, because the other thing is that you build a life in a place. It's not some of it is not as simple as I don't want to be home, or I don't want to be here, or I don't want to be there. There are all kinds of reasons why people prefer to be where they are. Some of it could also just be purely adventure. If no Ghanaian ever left, or if we all went back home, what would... So there's some of this is, I think sometimes we put too fine.
No, but Sylvia, the question here is not the choice to stay, right?
Yes.
But it's about your home not being welcoming anymore, pretty much.
That's precisely, and it can be it can be welcoming and unwelcoming in different ways.
Okay.
And I've said this before, that I have enjoyed being here as an adult. Now, I don't know what it would have been like if I started my career in Ghana. It would have been a completely different experience. In fact, there are people who would say, there are people who ask me questions like, what is the difference between mothering in the diaspora versus mothering at home? And that's a question that I cannot answer, because I've not had that experience as well, right? So there are all these little things. Some of it, as people have said, is the enabling environment. It is that when I go back home, there are things that I have to get used to again. And I don't think anyone in particular doesn't think they want to go home. It's just, there are people who want to go home. There are people who want to stay here. There are people who want to go home sometimes. There are people who don't want to go home sometimes. So I think that question becomes one that can also be very individual.
Yes.
Just beyond the structural. And for me, it is not so much that Ghana is yearning for us to come. Exactly. I don't think if that were the case, then, there would be this, okay, well, we've got to go home. I mean, we have so many talents in Ghana that are not recognized. We've seen it over the last couple of years, where people are leaving the country in droves, and people would leave just because of so we are not even nurturing that which we have. We are wasting a lot of that which we have. So there's also that part of it, is that, can we focus on what we have at home? And I think I've said this before, that it's more about, the brain circulation.
Okay.
Right? Because that is more important than talking about it as if people have abandoned post, as it were. So
yeah. I guess, I mean, with technology these days, the way we view labor is different. And so you can make an impact with your knowledge while probably still located in we can view the diaspora like a global, a remote or a satellite office, right? You're located in a satellite office, you're working remotely, and still have impact in your home country. But anyway, thanks for your insightful contributions this afternoon. We've covered a lot of ground, right? We looked at the inauguration in general, some of the key annunciations of the incoming administration. We also looked at some of the potential hurdles that they may face. And I think overwhelmingly, the idea is that if the Mahama administration is to make any progress, we need systemic changes, especially with respect to our governance arrangement, right? There have to be some inbuilt corrective feedbacks that would correct some of the things that happen. So, for instance, in terms of corruption, if there's a corrupt act, it's supposed to trigger an action by an institution that would correct it. And Oreku, in the beginning, when I was introducing the issue of the oral and the pronouncements of Martin Kwebu with respect to the former, is it BNI boss, who was found to have taken some government property, but he returned it, and the decision was that they're not going to proceed with a prosecution. I was of the opinion that the law should take its course. And Ike mentioned that we tend to focus a lot on personalities, right? We put together a committee with certain known figures who are advocates of anti-corruption.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to let the system work. If somebody is found culpable of any wrongdoing, let the law be triggered to take action rather than looking out for certain individuals that we know have been championing anti-corruption in our body politic, right?
Yeah, I
so
agree.
All right, so I think I appreciate your presence this afternoon. I appreciate our viewers, and then hopefully if I call on you again, you'll come and then share your insightful views to the rest of Ghanaians. And again, I want to remind you that anytime you make an appearance, try to come with concrete solutions so that intellectuals are not tagged as people who only philosophize and theorize without giving any
I think there were a lot of
But we are not.
practical solutions today, right?
Yeah,
But it's not even fair to say that we should even come with solutions, because the solutions are so complex that if anybody goes around and pontificating solutions, that person really at times don't have a good understanding of the system.
Okay.
Solutions really has to be, so you've identified the problem, you expect people to come together and fashion out solutions. It's not necessarily one person coming to say, hey, well, I think when you do it this way to work. Of course, this is that person's view, but might not be.
All right, don't shoot the messenger. I'm only the bearer of the message.
I have one solution. We all
telling you
should
to
become
tell them.
Pan-African. We all
Yeah.
must become Pan-African. People
Okay.
look at what it means to become Pan-African. That's my one solution for today. One big one.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
Okay,
All
boss.
right. Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Good
Bye.
afternoon.
Ike, bye.
Bye. Yeah.
You let it yum 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 yum. My tina yele pese.